want to welcome you back to GLBC Connections with my co-star Stormy. Stormy, how you doing there, pup? Back when I worked in a glass plant, I would spend a little time with young couples explaining the power of compound interest because they typically came from poor backgrounds. They didn't know how to handle money, and they typically were, if both the husband and the wife working in the plant were making quite a bit, far more than anybody in their family to that point ever had. But they didn't quite know how to save it. So I would show them a little spreadsheet in which I would say, stop eating out once a week. They typically ate out a lot, and put that money into 401k. And look what happens over 35 years. That investment grows and builds. And I remember one young lady, I showed the spreadsheet to her, and I said, if you just stop eating out once a week and put that money in the 401k, when you retire, you'll have this much money. It was well over $300,000 just by stopping eating out once per week, and they were probably eating out 3 times. She said, I have to go talk to my husband. And they went and signed up for a 401k. Those kind of moments I actually really enjoyed. I didn't get paid for them. It didn't really matter. I was just passionate about seeing them do well and was always happy when they did. Well, that brings me to the parable today that we want to look at. It's a very short parable. It's not even really a story. It's just a couple quick lines in Mark chapter 4. And although I'm responsible for all of verses 21 to 35, I really only want to talk about a couple of verses this morning. In verses 24 and 25, Jesus says, "Consider carefully what you hear," he continued. "With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and even more." Well, here's the first part of it is about just how they would measure grain. They use scoops. And basically what Jesus is saying, the scoop you use to measure out is the same scoop that will be used with you. That was a fairly common use of that analogy, although Jesus kind of uses it to talk about the kingdom of God, as we'll see in just a moment. But I want you to think about how they would scoop grain and how much those scoops were and how big they were and things like that. So he's talking about basically that, and he's using the analogy, and then he finishes with this. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. Jesus is basically saying this, that the investment we make in the kingdom of God will be returned to us and even more. This whole passage, verses 21 to 35, really is all about the kingdom of God. And here Jesus is basically saying the investment you make in the kingdom is what will be returned to you. The investment that you make in following Christ will be returned to you. Here, I think we need to pause and think about the ways that we invest in things. And I'm not just talking about finances now, but all kinds of things. We invest in our children's sports. We invest in our retirement. We invest in savings accounts. We invest in our homes. We invest in vehicles. We have, as the song from Arcade Fire says, we have everything now. We have so much. In fact, there's a great line from that song. In Arcade Fire, he says, every song that I've ever heard is playing at the same time. It's absurd, he says. We have everything now. And it's true with Spotify and Pandora. Any song that I've ever heard in my life, and I do this sometimes, I'll think of a song from 20 years ago, and I can immediately bring it up. We have everything now. And yet, it's so unsatisfying. My question today is, where are you investing? What measure are you putting toward the kingdom of God? Are you just taking a little bit, a little tiny measure, and putting it toward the kingdom? And Jesus says, if you do that, you wind up losing it. The larger you invest in the kingdom, the more is returned to you. We have, again, as Arcade Fire says, we have everything now. And yet, it is so deeply unsatisfying, isn't it? The more we invest in children's sports, the more we want. The more we invest in our retirement, the more we need. The nicer we make our house, the more we want. The more we watch HGTV, the nicer we want it to look. The deeper the temptation to put up shiplap someplace, if you know what I'm talking about. The idea, I think, that Jesus is trying to get at is that all those things are unsatisfying. And it's not punishment that he's talking about, that if we don't make the right investment, it's not the idea that it will be stolen away from us, but rather that investment is necessary into God's kingdom. It's necessary to put our investment into our relationship with Christ. That in the end, that's the only thing that matters. I think Arcade Fire actually captures this point a little bit in their song "Everything Now," as they talk about the fact we have everything now, and yet we're deeply unsatisfied. That, I think, is the current nature of American culture. We have more than we could ever ask for, but we're deeply unsatisfied. I think that's true because we're not putting our investment in the right place. We're not really putting it in our relationship with Jesus Christ, in his teaching, in following him wholeheartedly. As a pastor, all I ever want for people, and this is really true, all I ever really want is for you to know Jesus wholly and completely. All I ever want is for you to know him more deeply today than you knew him yesterday. For you to rely on him and depend on him and invest in his kingdom. My hope today is you'll think about where you're investing, where you're putting your time and energy and money, and think about how those things are either keeping you from the kingdom or advancing your relationship with Christ. Those questions are deeply important and of eternal significance. Always, I want to talk with you if you want to talk more about it. I'm always happy to help in that area, and I know Brian and Andrew are as well. Thanks for joining us. That's a little bit on Mark 4.